Hi guys, it's Suri, so welcome back to my channel. It is already time to do my April reading wrap-up. I ended up having a really great reading month this month. I read 11 books in total, and I just had just in general a lot of really highly rated books that I really enjoyed. I found some new favorites. All in all, I'm very pleased with how this month went, and I'm so excited to tell you about all of the books I read. Before we get started though, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you're enjoying my content, and click the bell icon so you actually know when I upload videos, because YouTube kind of sucks that way. Let's take a look at my TBR for April. In that regard, I did kind of poorly because I only read I think 5 books from my TBR, as you can see right here. That's okay though, because I also ended up participating in Tome Topple, which was kind of a spur of the moment decision, like 2 days before the readathon started. So I had to replace some of my books, unfortunately, with some Tome Topple books. But on the plus side, I read 4 books for Tome Topple, so you know, you win some, you lose some. Let's talk about the stats. So as I said, I read 11 books, and of those 11, I rated 0 1 star, 2 2 stars, 3 3 stars, 3 4 stars, and also 3 5 stars. And I'm so impressed by that ratio, because before that, last month, I think I actually had only 1 5 star, and it was my first 5 star of the whole year. So to have read 3 amazing, fantastic, new favorite books in 1 month is genuinely astonishing to me. And this also brings us to an average rating of 3.6 stars for the month. So that's just really awesome. Because I participated in Tome Topple, I ended up reading quite a few bigger books, and that brings my total pages for the month to 4,595, which is also, I think, probably so far a record for this year. That means I read about 153 pages a day, and the books were on average about 417 pages long. For genres, I have 4 fantasies, 2 sci-fi, 2 historical fiction, 1 romance, contemporary, and literary fiction. The books were mainly set in fantasy settings. 5 of those were in those settings. I have 2 that are in the US, 1 that is maybe in Bolivia, and 1 in Singapore, and 1 in the UK. For authors, I realized that I had completely forgotten this year, for all wrap-ups this year, to include a stat of gender for some reason. So yeah, I'm kind of dumb, but I read 2 male and 9 female authors this month. 7 of them were new to me, where 4 were not. And 7 of the books I read I would consider hyped, and 4 a little bit more obscure. For release years, 10 of the books were released between 2010 and 2018, and 1 was a 2019 release. In terms of age groups, I read 5 young adult and 6 adult books, and for languages, they were all in English. And that is it for the stats. Now let's jump right into some reviews. So the first of the 2 stars that I read this month, I've already reviewed because it was part of a try a chapter tag, and at the end of that I ended up picking this book and reviewing it in full. So if you want to know more of my thoughts on that, check out that video. The first part is a vlog, but at the end I do a full-on good quality sit-down review, so you could just jump ahead if you don't care to see the whole vlog. But that book is Women Talking by Miriam Toews. This is a literary fiction, sort of speculative novel, and it imagines a group of women that have been living in this very religious patriarchal commune that have been systematically raped for many years, and them kind of having a discussion about their situation and trying to figure out what they're gonna do. You can again check out that review as to why I wasn't a fan of this. My other 2 star couldn't be more different, because this is The Devil in Spring by Lisa Kleypas, I believe is her name. This is a historical romance novel, and it was the last book I read in April on a complete whim. It's actually the 3rd book in the Ravenel series, I believe, and I've not read the previous ones, but this one I found on Amazon, a Kindle deal for 99 cents, and I was like, let's just try it out. And with these romance novels that are kind of just companion novels, novels to one another because they all follow different couples. Like, it doesn't really matter where in the series you start. Basically, this is set, I believe, in Victorian England, and it follows a young lady. Is she a lady or like a society girl woman called Pandora, who is very clumsy and very much like not like other girls. Her whole gimmick is that she's anachronistically feminist, which is great. Like, she wants to run her own board game business. She doesn't want to get married because legally it would mean ceasing to be a person, because as soon as she gets married, her husband gets like to make all the decisions. Like, she cannot sign a contract. She cannot enter into any legal kind of relationships, which is crazy. Like, just imagining that was actually the case back then is ludicrous. But what I kind of disliked about that situation is not so much that she was so feminist, but more that was used to sort of put down all the other ladies that were behaving according to the times, kind of thing. So yeah, I was a bit annoyed at that. But basically, the book starts off with her getting into a very unfortunate situation where she like bends over and somehow gets stuck in a settee, which I still don't know how that actually happened, but whatever. And she's like rescued by Lord St. Vincent, who, because they're like discovered together alone into this like compromising position, he has somehow like ruined her reputation, and he's now forced to marry her, and she's very, very much against that, obviously for the reasons I just named earlier. And so they decide to just like spend a week together at his family estate to get to know each other better and then figure out what they want to do, kind of thing. And at first I actually quite enjoyed this book because even though it's dumb, it was not poorly written, and I enjoyed getting to know about the characters. I felt like they had a decent amount of personality. I liked that the setting and the bits of plot that were there, that were also like kind of important. They were focused on like their family backstory and things like that. So it wasn't too like focused exclusively on the romance, which I personally like, because I need to have like a little bit of something around that if I'm gonna enjoy it. But then I feel like the book kind of like fucked itself over a little bit with the premise, because it kind of forces them to get married pretty quickly, at the very least at the end of that week, because otherwise society is gonna freak out apparently. So while most other historical romances will like end with a wedding because that's like the climax and then everything else is kind of boring, let's be honest, they get married in the middle of the book. And after that, the book completely loses its shit. Like, it tries to like all of a sudden go off into a completely different direction. It introduces a mystery element or like a crime element, and I was just like, what is happening here? In the end, I felt like I had read two different novellas that had just happened to be about the same people, but that had nothing really to do with one another, because that main thing from the beginning completely doesn't matter anymore by the end, and the end thing was never alluded to in the beginning. So it's just a hot mess, to be perfectly honest. I do feel like the author seems like she knows her stuff about the period of time, and she's not a bad writer as such, so I think I would probably pick up something by her in the future again. I just hope like the other books she writes have like a premise that is more conducive to the typical like pacing of a romance novel, because I feel like there's a reason why they're normally paced like that, because otherwise they don't work, or it's much more difficult to actually make them work. But I've already talked about this one book for way too long, so let's jump right into my 3 stars now. My first 3-star is a novella, a sci-fi novella, and it's called Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This is very popular on BookTube, especially like when it first came out. I heard so many great things about it, and I decided to get it on Kindle because it's extremely short, like it's not even 100 pages, and the physical copy is like way too expensive for that little amount of content. So if you're going to get this, I recommend just getting the ebook. But basically, this is a sci-fi novella, and it's very difficult to explain because it's so short, and because of that, it also kind of throws you in at the deep end and doesn't really give you much world building or exposition. But basically, it's about this girl from Earth, and I don't even know, it's like sci-fi, but also with like magical elements, so it's even more difficult to explain, but her people can like do something special basically. And she's very, very smart, and she, I think as the first of her race of humans, gets to go to a different planet, to like the most prestigious university in the whole galaxy. But on her way there on the spaceship, their ship gets invaded by another race of aliens that kills everyone on board except for her. And I kind of want to leave it at that because yeah, I think I've already told you like half the book at this point. It's very complex because so little of it is actually explained. You just kind of have to go with the flow when reading. It doesn't really lend itself to much questioning or trying to like figure things out. I feel like you just kind of have to take everything at face value. And while I did enjoy it, I feel like it should have been a longer story. And that's kind of why I only gave it 3 stars. Like, I thought it redeemed itself a little bit by the end, but overall it was just too short to be satisfying enough. And I wanted a lot more. The next book I read, I got again on a complete whim because I saw it in somebody's videos and I was like, it's enough time has passed. I need to pick this up right now. And that is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabata here. This book has been on BookTube for such a long time that I feel like I probably don't need to tell you much about it anymore. But basically it is like your most generic YA fantasy story, like the most overdone story that you can imagine. The main character in this book is called Laya, and she's from this people called the Scholars that have been overthrown and kind of been subjected to the rule of the Martial Empire. They're not allowed to learn how to read and write. They're basically kept as they're basically like the lowest of the lowest. Her family gets killed or something and her brother gets captured, so she decides to join a group of rebels, of course, and they tell her she has to infiltrate this martial school as a slave to try and find out what they're like planning and whatever. And then the other main character is Elias, who is a martial, and he's a student at that school. He's one of the best of his class, but he's very unhappy with the situation, very unhappy kind of with this martial way of thinking and their way of doing things, way of going about punishing their students in particular. So he's kind of considering deserting, but he knows what will be his fate if he does. So they run into each other and then there's a love story. And do I have to say more? I feel like, as I said, you can kind of just base on the premise. I'm probably sure like 100% of you would know how this book goes. So much of this book is just so painfully predictable. The thing is that after putting this book down and like trying to sort through my thoughts, I realized that like there's really nothing objectively good about this, like, or even nothing that I could be like, oh, this was well done, except for the writing, which is now what I attribute the fact to, that I read this in like 2 days and couldn't put it down and somehow still enjoyed it. I definitely feel very conflicted about this because the like emotional side of me enjoyed it, but like the rational one is like, this was a kind of shit book. So I don't know, like, I don't want to recommend this or like not recommend this because it's genuinely impossible to give you a proper assessment of this. I feel like I've been reviewing books on here for so long now, and it's never really happened to me that I was so undecided on a book and that my own opinion was so conflicting. But you know, it is what it is. It is what it is, and I genuinely don't know what to say about this. And then my last 3 star is more of like a 3.5 star, and that is Winter by Marissa Meyer, the last book in the Lunar Chronicles. I read this for the Tome Topple readathon this month. It has over 800 pages, and I'm very glad to have finally ticked this off my list and get to take it off my TBR now. I did not enjoy it, but I also don't think it's the best book ever. I feel like the Lunar Chronicles are very meh. It's like the best way I can put it. They're like a very okay series. There's nothing to stand out either way. Like, they're not terrible, but they're also not fantastic. They're just kind of like there. And if you have them and you like enjoy the premise or whatever, I guess you will enjoy them as well. But like, I don't know. I feel like it's not really worth getting into because there's 4 books and this one is so long. And while I did enjoy it while reading it because it was kind of fun and light and easy, it's also very forgettable at the end of the day and just nothing to write home about, basically. By the way, if you want to see a reading vlog where I read this book, I will link it in the cards and in the description. I just uploaded that last Sunday. Yeah, so go watch that if you're curious. Also, there's a lot of cute animals, so that hasn't sold you on going to watch that now, then I don't know what will. Now we're getting into my 3 4 stars, and the first is another book that I read for Tome Topple. That is Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. It is a lighthearted contemporary about this girl that gets taken home to Singapore for the first time with her boyfriend, and she finds out that his family is ridiculously rich, like to the point of where they just give each other like condos and houses for random gifts every now and again. So yeah, she's obviously thrown for a loop by this whole situation, and the family and friends and like high society in Singapore is also not very accepting of her, and they kind of just want to get her to leave. A very lighthearted, very fun, very like drama-filled story, but I really enjoyed it. I honestly want to read the sequels as soon as possible because, I don't know, this was just so much fun, and because it's set in large part in Singapore, and that is a country that I know almost nothing about, at least before going into this I didn't. I really enjoyed the like footnotes and little hints here and there that were kind of educating the reader on the culture and on history and on why people kind of do certain things or think a certain way sometimes. So I really appreciated that was included, because I feel like if it wasn't, then you might start feeling a little bit of culture shock getting into this book, because it's just so different from what most people know. Unless you're from there, obviously, but I'm just talking from like a Western perspective. So overall, I really enjoyed this, and I highly recommend it if it sounds fun to you and you're looking for like a quick, easy, enjoyable read. Although it's not actually that quick. It's like over 500 pages, so might still take a minute, but it's definitely enjoyable. My next 4-star read is the first book I finished in April, so it's been a little bit since I've read it, but I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, and nobody is more surprised than I am that I enjoyed it so much. That is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm not going to tell you the plot again because I'm sure you know, but I really enjoyed this. I like the format a lot. I'm a fan of documentaries of celebrities, and it kind of reminded me a lot of that. I really appreciated that we got to know the character so well, despite the fact that it's told in this like interview format, which, you know, doesn't necessarily lend itself to, you know, going into a lot of depth on the individual characters. But I feel like it was handled very well, and all of them weren't just talking about like the facts, but also kind of having emotions and their personal experience kind of influence what they're saying. So I really enjoyed that. I also really liked how this book gave some insights into what it could possibly have been like to be a famous band in the 70s. There's a lot of things that I had never considered that might occur in a band, like jealousies. I mean, it seems like self-explanatory, but genuinely, I did not even think about like, oh, maybe not everyone is super happy with just like one person taking the spotlight and like making all the important decisions. Who would have thought? I definitely preferred this a whole lot to The Seven Husbands, and if you haven't picked it up yet, then I think you should give it a try. And the last 4-star read that I picked up this month was a reread that I just grabbed like on a whim again, because I was at home, I was lying in bed and I was sick, and I saw this on my shelf and I was like, I've been meaning to reread this for a minute. It's a fantasy, it seems like an easy read, let's just do it. And a funny thing happened. I ended up enjoying this more than the first time I read it, which so far has never happened. This is literally a book that's one of a kind in that regard. And that is Grave Marcy by Robin Lefevers. This is the first book in the His Fair Assassin trilogy, and I read this like 4 years ago. Basically, it follows a woman called Ismay who is forced to marry this really gross dude. Just in time before she actually has to consummate the marriage, she gets help to escape to a convent of Saint Mortain, who is the god of death, and she is his daughter. So that means she has special powers. She can see like marks on people, like shadows in different places that will let her know who she should kill and how. Basically, she's trained at this convent to become an assassin, and then a few years later she's sent on a mission to join the court, to basically act as an assassin as well as a spy to try to figure out who is plotting against the Duchess of Brittany, which this book is set in the 1480s in Brittany in France. Well, it's France. At the time it was an independent duchy called Brittany, and it's like in the northwest of France. And I didn't know that this is like a real thing. Like this entire book is set in a pretty accurate historical setting, which embarrassingly enough, I didn't realize until the end of book 2 when I read the author's note. So let's take a minute to laugh at me for that. I was genuinely convinced that this was all entirely made up, but in fact, a lot of the characters in the book, such as Anne, the Duchess of Brittany, was actually a real person, were actually real people, and they actually did a lot of things that they end up doing in the series. So when I found that out, I was even more impressed with this book than I already was. The first time I read this, I gave it 3 stars. This time I gave it 4 stars. I think it's fun, it's interesting, it's a cool fantasy concept, like the magic system is pretty cool, assassin nuns are always awesome, the pacing is good, the romance is nice, like literally every aspect I was like, I am enjoying this. The only thing I don't love quite as much is the main character, Ismay. She's very arrogant and kind of obnoxious at times, so I was not her personal biggest fan, but overall I really enjoyed this book, and I think it's quite underrated. Like, I've seen it a few times, but it definitely doesn't get the recognition it deserves. So if this is still on your TBR after so many years and you still want to read it, I highly recommend you do. And if it's not, then put it on there, because I think it definitely deserves a little bit more credit. Because I love that one so much, I needed to instantly read the sequel, obviously, and this is what takes us into the 5-star territory. And the first read of my 5 stars was Dark Triumph, the sequel to Grave Mercy. This book follows a different character, which is also something I didn't know. It follows another nun from that abbey who is also a daughter of Mortain. They're all daughters of Mortain, basically. And she also has powers, and she is sent to the household of a super evil baron who wants to force the Duchess into marrying him so that he can be in power, basically. And it's her job to try and stop him, but also again spy for the abbey and whatever. I enjoyed this book so much more because Sibella, the main character in this one, Sibella, her, she's a much more complex and interesting character than Ismay from book 1. Her past is a much more conflicted and multifaceted, and I was just absolutely fascinated with reading, with reading her story. She struggled a lot in her life. She's had to deal with a lot of abuse from her family in particular, and that has even gone so far as to veer into sexual abuse, and she's been dealing with a lot of issues of kind of coming to terms with the things that have happened to her and realizing that she is not at fault for what other people did to her. That shouldn't make her feel ashamed or dirty or tainted, because this is not something that she has brought upon herself. That process and following her through that process, it was absolutely fantastic, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, it's definitely a little bit darker at times, but that also makes the outcome, or what you get from it, so much more valuable in my opinion. This book is kind of a chronological sequel to the first, but as I said, follows a different character, so I would recommend reading these in order. But yeah, I highly recommend at least trying and getting to Dark Triumph. Even if you're not fully in love with Grave Mercy, this one is definitely worth holding out for. This video is so long. I am dying. And probably you are too. 2 more books to go, you guys. Okay, so my second to last 5-star read was Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This has also been on everybody's radar, I believe, for a while. Basically, this follows President Lincoln, whose son Willie dies at the age of 12, and he gets put into this crypt, and Lincoln ends up visiting him every day. Not every day, but he ends up going back visiting his body a lot because he just cannot let go of his son, which is very understandable. And the thing is that Willie in this book hasn't actually fully passed away yet, but he's stuck in this limbo world called the Bardo, between life and death, where ghosts end up that are still too tethered to life. They can't fully let go for some reason. And that is the same with Willie, because his father keeps visiting him, he feels like he has to wait for him and he can't just go pass away into the afterlife. The book is told in quotes from these ghosts, but also historical quotes sometimes to set the scene, which is a very interesting mix and definitely takes a minute to get used to. But overall, this book is such a gem. It genuinely made me cry so much, especially at the ending, because you are really full on confronted with grief and the idea of grief and the concept of life and death and the things that make life livable and the things that stand out for us. Like, it's the smallest things that can hold the most emotional meaning. It made me cry. It made me cry so much because I thought it was just so true. And for us who are still alive, I feel like this is also very life affirming in that sense. And I really, really, really enjoyed this. I highly recommend you check it out. It should definitely be on everybody's TBR. And yeah, it's just a wonderful gem of a book that you have to read. Please. And finally, the last book I wanted to talk about was a complete wild card and a completely random book I picked up. I've owned this for like 5 years, never looked at it twice, even though I kept putting it on my project TBR list, but I was like, I'm sure it's shit. And it's not. Decidedly not. And that is Entwined by Hedda Dixon. This is a fairy tale retelling of the story of the 12 dancing princesses, who are basically 12 sisters, daughters of the king, whose biggest passion in life is dancing, but they're forbidden from doing it because, in this retelling at least, their mother recently passed away and they're supposed to be in mourning. But because dancing kind of is the thing that reminds them the most of their mother and connects them the most to their memories of her, they decide to do it in secret, and they find this hidden passage and this hidden place in the castle that is very magical, that they can go and steal away to at night and dance there to this like elusive magical music. And there's also a person there called the Keeper who encourages them to come back every night and ends up convincing them to help him free him because he is trapped in the castle. And yeah, the story goes from there. I don't want to tell you too much, but overall I absolutely adored this. It is such a wonderful fairy tale retelling, and it totally touched my heart so many times in so many ways. First of all, I love the family dynamic in this, and I always say, like, I love and I miss books. I want more books that have healthy and happy and functional family dynamics in them, and this one does. And it's not always perfect. It's not always lovey-dovey. Everybody is supportive of each other 100% of the time. That's definitely not it, but that's also not realistic. This is more of like a family that has genuine, deep love, affection, and respect for each other, that support each other, but that also fight with each other, that all have their individual issues that sometimes encroach on their collective lives, but that never tears them apart. And I just absolutely loved reading about that and their family dynamic, and it just made my heart melt 1,000 times over. I also really enjoyed the writing style in this and the pacing and just literally everything about this book I absolutely adored. I cannot believe I did not read this sooner. It is phenomenally done, and if you're a fan of fairy tales or fairy tale retellings, definitely put this on your list and bump it all the way up there, because it definitely deserves also more time and attention and more people to read it, because it's such a gem of a book and you need to check it out. So do it. Wow, that is one hell of a pile over here, but thank God we have finally reached the end of this video. I feel like I've been sitting here for 15 hours filming this video. I hope you haven't died of starvation or thirst yet, but thank you so much for sticking through this video with me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely leave some comments down below letting me know what you read in April, if you found any new hidden gems, which I did. I found like 2 at least. Before you leave though, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I upload every Tuesday, Friday and Sunday, and I hope to see you very soon with another video. Until then, have a lovely week. Bye!